Yeah, sorry, it was a question.
Yep, go for it.
It talked about whoever it was angry and downcast.
Yeah.
And I wondered what the significance of downcast was.
Yeah, so it's his facial expression was down. So not only does it say that he was angry, but his face was low. It could just be another part of that doublet pattern that we're finding throughout the text. There's lots of pairs. And so in the description of what he is like, there's two active parts of the description. Not only is he angry, but his face is downcast. And it's interesting, they're coming before the presence of the Lord. And so not only is he angry, there's already this turning away from God. Even in his demeanor, he is becoming distant from the Father. So it's part of the ongoing narrative of separation from God. Now, there may be other ideas and thoughts behind that, but that's what comes to mind for myself. Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Rob.
Yes, it's probably one of the perennial ones, Samuel, but it refers to people started paying attention to God. Where did those people come from?
Yeah, that's right. I love the fact that these Genesis creation accounts don't actually explain lots of stuff that we look at and go, oh, I wish I had answers for that. There are different answers to that response. Some people suggest that Cain, Abel, and Seth were not the only sons. Well, they weren't the only children of Adam and Eve, that perhaps they had other children, and then they had other children who had other children. And when we look at the genealogies in the Genesis accounts, they live a long time. So it could be that, there are people become quite numerous if people continue having children into very old age. For me, I just don't think Genesis is trying to answer that question. It's just the fact that in his rebellion against God, his hypocrisy is highlighted in the fact that he is willing to be violent to others, his own brother, but he is fearful of other people's violence upon them. And so it's showing not only is there the fall, the nature of sin is not only corrupting his action, but even corrupting his thinking and his rationality. Everything about Cain is actually being ruined by his rebellion against God. He is truly being enslaved to sin. So I'd love to answer that question, but it's one of those, this is, I think, quite clearly a proto-history, in that the author is writing this with a view of these characters, these true people in prehistory whose lives represent all of humanity. And it's this representational nature of this text which causes us dilemmas, but it doesn't cause a dilemma to the original audience, because that's not the intent. So the author clearly sees this as actually happening in history. There is a real Adam and Eve and a real Cain, Seth, and Abel, but also they are a representational people. They represent humanity in and of themselves. So it's often called a proto-history. It's not history the way we tend to think about it. We ought not to see it as dishonest if someone says, look, it's wrong because where are the other people when it only mentions 3 people? We've got to be careful not to import a modern historical context onto this creation account. Yeah, good question. I wish I had a better answer. Cool. You'll notice that every time I looked at something as being a hint or a suggestion, so the bigamy of Lamech, or the differences in the gifts, and we look at those little hints, we've got to be careful because sometimes we can read into text too much. But can you see why I felt quite confident reading into those 2 texts, those 2 warnings? Because in the text, straight away afterwards, it gives us the obvious outcome of them. So in Scripture, it's okay when we read things to go, hey, this seems like a bit of a warning here. We can often test it ourselves by following and see what the context does. So yeah, the bigamy here is actually a negativity. It's actually the first time it's mentioned, and straight after it, Lamech is this massive buffhead. The difference is in the gift, some of what he offers, as opposed to the first fruit and the fat of the lamb. Let the context shape the way you approach a text.